The first time I saw Waverly Drummond walk into that ballroom, every conversation in the room paused for just half a second, not because she was announced, not because anyone was impressed, but because people had heard about her, and none of them knew what their face was supposed to do when they finally saw her in person. The Legacy Foundation Gala was held every February at the Ashford Grand Hotel in Boston, one of those old Beacon Hill properties with marble floors that felt like walking on history and chandeliers so large they looked like something that belonged in a cathedral. Douglas Drummond, founder of Drummond Precision Systems and one of the wealthiest men in Massachusetts, hosted it every year. Senators came, athletes came, CEOs of companies I couldn't afford to buy a coffee from came. I was there because I needed the money. My name is Miles Carver. I was 27 years old, working event temp jobs through a staffing agency, while my younger sister Becca was going through her second round of chemotherapy at Mass General. She was 23. She had a playlist she listened to during infusions called boring waiting music, and she refused to let our mother sit with her because she said it made her feel sicker to see Mom trying not to cry. I was picking up every shift the agency offered: corporate dinners, private events, hotel banquets. The Gala paid $300 for a 5-hour shift plus tips. I wore a white shirt I'd pressed twice that afternoon and told myself I'd be invisible all night, which is exactly what a catering assistant is supposed to be. I was refilling water glasses near the East Corridor when Waverly arrived. She came in wearing a black strapless gown, her dark hair pinned up, and on her right side, below the elbow, a carbon fiber prosthetic that caught the chandelier light like a brushed steel sculpture. She moved with the kind of composure that takes years to develop, shoulders back, chin level, eyes forward, but I noticed the way her left hand gripped her small clutch, too tight. The composure was a practice, not a comfort. There's a difference if you watch for it. The whispers didn't start immediately. They simmered. A woman near the bar leaned toward her husband and said something I couldn't make out but could read in the shape of her mouth. A man in a silver tie recognized Waverly, caught her eye, and suddenly became very interested in something happening across the room. A small cluster of guests near the appetizer station shifted almost imperceptibly, the way a group does when it's quietly decided not to include someone without saying so out loud. I kept moving, that wasn't my place. But I kept watching. If you believe that kindness costs nothing and means everything, take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to Mercy Stories. We're here to tell the ones that stay with you. Douglas Drummond worked the room like a man who had been doing it his whole life, which he had. Tall, silver-haired, mid-60s, with the kind of face that looked distinguished even when it was worried, and I noticed, once, twice, a third time, that his eyes tracked his daughter across the room the way a parent watches a child walking a tightrope. He knew exactly what she was navigating. He just couldn't do it for her. I didn't know the full story that night. I only knew pieces, the version that had made it into the news cycle, and then faded the way everything eventually fades. 18 months earlier, Waverly had been driving back from a weekend in Concord when she stopped near Walden Pond. A 6-year-old boy named Henry had followed his dog onto the ice and gone through. Nobody else on the trail had moved. The water temperature was 31 degrees. Waverly didn't stand there calculating. She went in after him. Henry went home with his mother 2 days later without a scratch. Waverly spent 6 weeks in the hospital. The vascular damage to her right forearm from the cold was too far gone. The surgery happened in stages. She was 29 years old. The news cycle covered it for about 3 weeks. Then something else happened, the way something else always does, and the cameras moved on. What they left behind was a woman whose life had split cleanly into before and after, and who had spent the better part of a year and a half trying to figure out how to live in the after. I didn't know any of that when the band struck up the first slow song of the evening. What I knew was this. Waverly stood near the edge of the dance floor, and in the space of about 4 minutes, I watched 7 different men find reasons not to approach her. A financial attorney from Cambridge adjusted his cuffs and made a beeline toward the bar. A state senator I recognized from the news pretended to receive an urgent phone call. 2 men who had been standing within 10 feet of Waverly suddenly found each other fascinating to talk to. The floor filled up around her in a slow, terrible tide of polite avoidance. Not one of them looked her in the eye. She wasn't angry. That's what I couldn't stop thinking about. She didn't look bitter or wounded. She looked tired. Not the tired of a long evening. The tired that accumulates over months of being someone that other people make a quiet decision about before they've said a word to you. The exhaustion of being managed rather than met. I had seen that expression exactly once before, on Becca's face in the hospital 3 months in, when a nurse had addressed every question to our mother instead of to her, as though being sick had somehow removed her ability to speak for herself. My supervisor, Phil Dunbar, had given us a clear briefing before the shift. We were there to be helpful and invisible in that order. No socializing with guests beyond our service functions. He caught my eye from across the room and gave me a tight shake of his head that I interpreted as a general reminder to stay focused. I set my water pitcher on a side table. I crossed the ballroom. Every step felt like it was happening at a different speed than the rest of the room. I was aware of the way conversations quieted slightly in a radius around me as I moved. The way people notice something unexpected before they can name what it is. I was also acutely aware that I was walking toward the daughter of a man who could have my temp agency account closed with one phone call, and probably had the personal number of everyone who had ever signed my paychecks. I thought about Becca watching bad reality TV in her hospital bed and pretending she wasn't scared. I kept walking. When I reached Waverly, I stopped. I met her eyes, and I said the only honest thing I could think of. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," I told her, "but would you like to dance?" She looked at me for a moment that felt longer than it was. Up close, her eyes were dark brown, and there was something careful in them, the particular wariness of someone who has learned to identify what kind of attention is coming before it arrives. Then something shifted. Just slightly, the grip on her clutch loosened by a fraction. "You work here," she said. Not an accusation, almost a question. "Yes," I said. "I do." She looked at my extended hand. She looked at the floor. Then she placed her left hand in mine and she said, "Okay." We were not graceful out there. I want to be honest about that. I had not danced formally since my cousin's wedding in 2019, and even then I had spent most of the reception near the shrimp cocktail. Waverly was clearly a better dancer than I was, but neither of us was performing for anyone. We moved in a slow, careful circle near the edge of the floor, which was all either of us needed. I didn't look at her prosthetic, not because I was avoiding it, but because it wasn't what was speaking to me right then. I was looking at her face, which had stopped performing. Whatever careful expression she'd worn when she walked into that room, the practiced composure, the chin-up discipline of someone who has armored themselves in advance. It was loosening, not into sadness, into something closer to relief. "You're going to catch some looks for this," she said quietly, after we'd been moving for a minute. "I've noticed," I said, and I had. A ring of guests at the edges of the floor was watching us with the kind of attention people give to something they find unusual but can't bring themselves to ignore. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "That I can see that you've noticed?" I thought about it for a second. "Not really," I said. "Does it bother you?" She was quiet for a moment. "It's when they pretend they're not looking that it gets to me." I understood that. The performance of not seeing is its own kind of cruelty. Her hand relaxed a little more in mine. Her shoulders, which had been carrying something invisible since she walked in, came down half an inch. We made another slow turn, and I noticed the way the light from the chandeliers fell across her face, the way she'd stopped scanning the room and was just present, here, in this moment instead of bracing against it. Near the end of the song, I caught a glimpse of Douglas Drummond at the room's edge. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't entertaining anyone. He was watching us, and his expression was the most complicated thing I'd seen on a man all evening. Protective, assessing, and underneath those things, something quieter. The look of a father watching his child breathe freely for the first time in a long time. When the music faded, Waverly didn't step back immediately. She stayed where she was for just a moment, holding still in the space where the song had been. Then she looked up at me, and she said something I have turned over in my mind almost every single day since. "Thank you," she said, "for not making it a thing." I didn't fully understand what she meant right then. I do now. She meant, "Thank you for treating this as ordinary. Thank you for walking across a room and asking a simple question and then simply being there, without a performance of your own virtue built around it. Thank you for not needing me to be a story about your goodness." "Thank you for saying yes," I told her. A few guests approached her after we stepped off the floor, cautiously at first, A woman from Tufts Medical who asked about the Foundation's survivor programming, a retired Navy captain who shook her hand with both of his and told her he had family in Concord who hadn't forgotten what she did. The ice cracked. Not dramatically, just cracked. Conversations formed where before there had been empty space. I picked up my water pitcher. I went back to work. I was completely convinced that was the end of it. The following Tuesday, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end told me that Douglas Drummond would like to speak with me at his office in the Seaport District that afternoon. If I was available, I stood in my kitchen for a solid minute after I hung up, cycling through every possible version of what that conversation might look like, most of them ending with me losing my temp agency standing. The Drummond building's lobby alone cost more than my apartment building. I rode a wood-paneled elevator up 14 floors, was walked to a corner office by a receptionist, who moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who handles a lot of difficult situations graciously, and found Douglas Drummond standing at the window looking out at Boston Harbor, which was steel gray and flat and beautiful in the way February things sometimes are. He shook my hand. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Mr. Carver," he said, "I'd like to know why you did what you did on Saturday." I had rehearsed 3 different answers on the drive over. All of them evaporated. "She was standing alone," I said. "She'd been standing alone for a while. That didn't seem right." Douglas looked at me the way you look at something you want to make sure you're reading correctly. A long, quiet evaluation. Then he nodded. Slowly, the way a man nods when a decision he's already mostly made gets confirmed. "Waverly hasn't attended a public event in nearly a year," he said. "The process of coming back, it isn't linear. But I want you to know that she asked about you by name Sunday morning. She found you in the event staffing roster." He paused. "She was smiling when she told me." He let that sit for a moment. "She said you didn't make it a thing." The weight of that sentence settled over the room like something physical. He offered me a contract position that afternoon, not catering. A program associate role with the Legacy Foundation, specifically on the team developing their new initiative for accident survivors and adaptive athletes across Hills, New England. The salary was more than I'd made in any 2 consecutive years of my working life. I asked him why he was offering it to someone whose professional background was event staffing and apartment maintenance work. Because in a room full of people with impressive backgrounds, he said, "You were the only one who did the right thing." I called Becca from the parking garage afterward, because I didn't trust myself to hold it together in the lobby. She started crying first, which gave me cover to do the same. The next several months were unlike anything I had experienced. The Legacy Foundation's survivor programming touched communities across Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Maine. Trauma patients, adaptive athletes, families of first responders navigating the financial aftermath of someone's worst day. My job was to connect these people to each other and to the resources that could keep them going. And it turned out the skills that transfer from a life of showing up and doing what needs doing are more applicable than anyone tells you. Waverly came back into the foundation offices about 2 weeks into my contract. Quietly, the way you re-enter a space you used to occupy and aren't certain still belongs to you. She sat in on a planning meeting and said almost nothing, but she was there. The following week, she came back, and the week after that. What we built between us wasn't dramatic. It was more ordinary than that, which I think is actually how the important things tend to grow. A lot of late Tuesday afternoons at the conference table, going over logistics and grant proposals. Lunch from the same falafel cart near South Station so many times the guy who ran it had her order ready when he saw us coming. Conversations about everything. Her semester in Edinburgh, my sister's treatment updates. A genuinely terrible action movie we'd independently seen the same weekend and had identically strong opinions about. She talked about the accident sometimes. When she did, she was matter-of-fact in a way I understood must have taken a long time to earn. She'd been driving back from a weekend trip when she heard the commotion from the pond. She pulled over. She saw the child in the water and didn't experience it as a decision so much as her body making one without her permission. The cold, she said, was a specific kind of total, like all sensations shutting down simultaneously, not painful, just gone. She said the hardest part wasn't the surgeries, wasn't the physical therapy or learning to button a shirt one-handed or any of the practical renegotiations her daily life required. The hardest part was the way people related to her afterward, or more precisely, the way they tried not to. The first time she spoke publicly again was at a fundraising dinner for the pediatric trauma unit at a children's hospital in Providence. She had planned to wear the silk glove she sometimes used at formal events, the one that covered the joint where the prosthetic met her arm. She told me 20 minutes before she went on that she was going to wear it. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled it off. She spoke for 8 minutes. She talked about Henry, the 6-year-old, and the water, and waking up in the hospital and being told what had happened to her arm. She talked about the months after, the fittings, the physical therapy, the night she spent 40 minutes in front of a mirror trying to recognize the person looking back at her. I spent a long time believing that what I looked like now was something to explain, she said. To preface, to apologize for. She paused. I don't believe that anymore. She raised her right arm, the prosthetic, and held it up simply, not defiantly, just showing it to the room, the way you show someone a scar you've stopped being ashamed of. In the front row, a 12-year-old boy who had lost 2 fingers in a farming accident raised his own hand in response, barely perceptibly, just enough. She saw him. She smiled at him, and I was standing in the wings with my clipboard pressed against my sternum because it was the only thing keeping me composed. It wasn't a fairy tale after that. I want to be clear about that. A month later, someone at a business publication ran a piece questioning whether Waverly's public profile represented an asset or a reputational liability for Drummond Precision's institutional partnerships. The language was calibrated and corporate, the kind of language designed to communicate something cruel while remaining something you can't quite call cruel. 2 board members raised it at a quarterly review. Quietly, just enough. I found Waverly at the conference table one evening after everyone else had gone home, her laptop open to the article, not reading it anymore, just staring at it. She didn't say anything for a long time. I sat down across from her. Hey, I said, do you remember what you told me the night of the gala, when the song ended? She looked up. You said thank you for not making it a thing, I said. You've been doing that since. You've walked back into every room they expected you to avoid. You stood at a podium in Providence, and you changed how every person in that room thinks about what strength actually looks like. I waited. What they're doing right now, that belongs to them, not to you. She was quiet for a moment. I know that, she said. I know you know it, I said. I just wanted to say it out loud so the room didn't feel so loud. She closed the laptop. We ordered takeout Thai from the place on Congress Street, and she laughed at least 3 times over the course of that evening, and I counted because it seemed worth counting. By the end of that year, the Foundation's Survivor Initiative had partnered with 14 hospitals across 3 states. An adaptive athletics scholarship fund placed 12 people into collegiate programs they'd been told weren't built for them. 340 families of first responders received emergency financial support during the kind of months that can undo a family without help. The work was quiet, consistent, and real in the way that the most important work tends to be. And Waverly, she stopped waiting for permission. She joined board meetings and didn't apologize for arriving. She spoke at a Veterans Appreciation Breakfast in Worcester and a high school commencement in Springfield. She found a therapist she actually liked, which she said was harder than people assumed. She worked with a prosthetic designer in Cambridge on a custom model finished in matte gold, and she wore it to every major event afterward, and people asked about it constantly. And she had started to find that she enjoyed telling them. February came back around, it always does in Boston. The night of the Legacy Foundation Gala, I arrived early out of habit. The Ashford Grand looked exactly the same as it had a year before. Same chandeliers, same marble, same long-stemmed arrangements on every table. But it felt different to be inside it. I'd spent a year inside the work it was meant to fund. I knew what the money did. I knew the names of people it had reached. I was standing near the entrance when Waverly arrived. She came in wearing deep burgundy. Her hair was down. The gold prosthetic caught the chandelier light exactly as it was designed to. She moved across the lobby with no particular set to her shoulders, not performing composure, simply present. She stopped to hug the director of the hospital partnership. She greeted the couple from the Providence dinner who had donated their anniversary funds to the pediatric unit. She moved through the room like someone who belonged in it, which she always had, but now she moved through it knowing that. When the band began the first slow song, she found me near the edge of the floor. "I believe you owe me a dance," she said. I smiled. "I'm pretty sure it was the other way around, technically." "I've decided to reframe history," she said. We stepped onto the floor. The room kept moving around us. Conversations, clinking glasses, the laughter of people who had waited a cold New England winter for a reason to dress up. Nobody paused to watch us. Nobody found a reason to look away. We were just two people at a party, which was exactly what Waverly had wanted a year ago and nobody had offered her. Partway through the song, she said something I had to lean in to hear over the music. "I used to think the accident was the dividing line," she said. "Before and after, the thing that split everything." She paused. "But I don't think that anymore. I think the dividing line was that night, the dance. That's where things actually changed." I didn't say anything for a moment. "How come?" I finally asked. She considered it. "Because I'd been telling myself that what happened to me changed what I was allowed to want, that belonging here, and being seen as a whole person, and just taking up space without explaining myself first, that those things were for the before version of me." She looked up. "You walked across a room and made that feel stupid. And once something feels stupid, it's very hard to keep believing in it." We stayed on the floor until the song ended. Neither of us rushed it. If this story meant something to you, share it with one person today who needs to be reminded that they are enough exactly as they are. And subscribe to Mercy Stories so we can keep telling the ones that matter. And before we go, comment the word worthy below if you believe every person in this world deserves to take up space without having to earn it first. Because I have been sitting with that word for a long time. Here is what I know now that I didn't know when I set down a water pitcher and crossed a hotel ballroom on a February night in Boston. I used to believe that courage was reserved for the moments that leave a mark. The frozen pond, the split-second choice, the thing you give that you can never get back. Waverly Drummond taught me that there's a different kind of courage, quieter, that doesn't make the news and doesn't leave a visible scar. It's the courage of walking into a room you've been quietly told you're not quite right for, and standing there anyway. Of letting someone see the full version of you when the easier thing, the familiar thing, the thing the entire room seems to be silently recommending, is to make yourself smaller. To cover it up, to spare everyone the discomfort of your presence. Waverly Drummond walked into a ballroom at the lowest moment of her public life, and she chose not to disappear. I was just lucky enough to be standing close enough to say, "I see you, and I'm not looking away."